Good day everyone. So for today's discussion, we will discuss chapter 5 entitled Distinguishing and Constructing Various Paper and Pencil Tests. So in this chapter, we are concerned with the developing paper and paper tests for assessing the attainment of educational objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy. Paper and pencil tests can either be selected response or constructed response type. So for selected response type, it includes true or false items, multiple choice type items, and matching type. While sa constructed response type naman, it includes enumeration, completion, and essays. So this chapter has its learning outcomes. First is to construct a table of specification or TOS. And the second one, construct paper and pencil tests in accordance with the guidelines in test construction. The construction of valid test items begins with a table of specifications. Now we will discuss planning a test and construction of table of specifications or TOS. The important steps in planning for a test are identifying test objectives or lesson outcomes, deciding on the type of objective test to be prepared, preparing a table of specifications, constructing the draft test items, and lastly, tryout and validation. The first step is identifying test objectives. An objective test, if it is to be comprehensive, it must cover the various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Each objective consists of a statement of what is to be achieved, preferably by the students. Like for example, we want to construct a test on the topic subject-verb agreement in English for a grade 5 class. The following are typical objectives. First is knowledge or remembering. The students here must be able to identify the subject and the verb in a given sentence. Next is comprehension or understanding. The student must be able to determine the appropriate form of a verb to be used given the subject of a sentence. Next is application or applying. The students must be able to write sentences observing rules on subject-verb agreement. Analysis or analyzing. The students must be able to break down a given sentence into its subject and predicate. Evaluation or evaluating. The students here must be able to evaluate whether or not a sentence observes rules on subject-verb agreement. Lastly, synthesis or creating. The students must be able to formulate rules to be followed regarding subject-verb agreement. Next is deciding on the type of objective test. The test objectives guide the kind of objective tests that will be designed and constructed by the teacher. This means aligning the test with the lesson objective or outcome. For instance, for the first 4 levels, we may want to construct a multiple choice type of test, while for application and judgment, we may give an essay test or a modified essay test. At all times, the test to be formulated must be aligned with the learning outcome. This is the principle of constructive alignment. Preparing a table of specifications or TOS. A table of specifications or TOS is a test map that guides the teacher in constructing a test. The TOS ensures that there is a balance between items that test lower level thinking skills and those which test higher order thinking skills, or alternatively, a balance between easy and difficult items in the test. The simplest TOS consists of 4 columns. The first column is level of objective to be tested. The second column is statement of objective. The third column is item numbers where such an objective is being tested. And the last column, the number of items and percentage out of the total for that particular objective. So here is example of prototype table of specifications. In the table of specifications, we can see that there are 5 items that deal with knowledge, and these items are items 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Similarly, from the same table, we see that 5 items represent analysis, namely 11, 15, 18, 21, and 23. The first 5 levels of Bloom's taxonomy are equally represented in the test, while synthesis is weighted equivalent to 10 points or double the weight given to any of the first 4 levels. The table of specifications guide the teacher in formulating the test. As we can see, the TOS also ensures that each of the objectives in the hierarchy of educational objectives is well represented in the test. As such, the resulting test that will be constructed by the teacher will be more or less comprehensive. Without the table of specifications, the tendency for the test maker is to focus too much on facts and concepts at the recall level. Constructing test items based on the TOS ensures alignment of learning outcomes and assessment tasks. Next level is constructing the test items. The actual construction of the test items follows the TOS. As a general rule, it is advised that the actual number of items to be constructed in the draft should be double the desired number of items. For instance, if there are 5 recall level items to be included in the final test form, then at least 10 recall level items should be included in the draft. The subsequent test tryout and item analysis will most likely eliminate many of the constructive items in the draft. Either they are too difficult, too easy, or non-discriminatory. Hence, it will be necessary to construct more items than will actually be included in the final test form. Most often, however, the tryout is not done due to lack of time. The last level is item analysis and tryout. The test draft is tried out to a group of pupils or students. The purpose of this tryout is to determine the item characteristics through item analysis and characteristic of the test itself, validity, reliability, and practicality. Now let's move forward to the types of paper and pencil tests. Development of paper and pencil tests requires careful planning and expertise in terms of actual test construction. The more seasoned teachers can produce true or false items that can test even higher order thinking skills and not just rote memory learning. Essays are easier to construct than the other types of objective tests, but the difficulty in scoring essay examinations teachers from using this particular form of examination in actual practice. One of the paper and pencil test type is selected response, which includes true or false items, multiple choice type items, and matching type. So, I will first discuss the true or false test. True or false test. Binomial choice or alternate response tests are tests that have only 2 options, such as true or false, right or wrong, yes or no, good or better, check or cross out, and so on. A student who knows nothing of the content of the examination would have 50% chance of getting the correct answer by sheer guesswork. Although correction for guessing formulas exists, it is best that the teacher ensures that a true or false item is able to discriminate properly between those who know and those who are just guessing. A modified true or false test can offset the effect of guessing by requiring students to explain their answer and to disregard a correct answer if the explanation is incorrect. Here are some rules of thumb in constructing true or false items. Guidelines for constructing alternate response tests. Rule number 1. Do not give a hint in the body of the question. For example, the Philippines gained its independence in 1898 and therefore celebrated its centennial year in 2000. In this example, the answer is false because 100 years from 1898 is not 2000 but 1998. Rule number 2. Avoid using the words always, never, often, and other words that tend to be either always true or always false. Example, Christmas always falls on a Sunday because it is a Sabbath day. In this example, statements that use the word always are almost always false. A test-wise student can easily guess his way through a test like this and get high scores even if he does not know anything about the test. Rule number 3. Avoid long sentences as these tend to be true. Keep sentences short. Example, tests need to be valid, reliable, and useful, although it would require a great amount of time and effort to ensure that tests possess this test characteristic. In this example, notice that the statement is true. However, we are also not sure which part of the sentence is deemed true by the student. It is just fortunate that in this case, all parts of the sentence are true and hence the entire sentence is true. Rule number 4. Avoid trick statements with some minor misleading word or spelling anomaly, misplaced phrases, etc. A wise student who does not know the subject matter may detect this strategy and thus get the answer correctly. For example, The Raven was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Allan is misspelled and the answer would be false. This is an example of a tricky but utterly useless item. Rule number 5. Avoid quoting verbatim from reference materials or textbooks. This practice sends the wrong signal to the students that it is necessary to memorize the textbook word for word and thus acquisition of higher level thinking skill is not given due importance. Rule number 6. Avoid specific determiners or giveaway qualifiers. Students quickly learn that strongly worded statements are more likely to be false than true. For example, statements with never, no, all, or always. Moderately worded statements are more likely to be true than false. Statements that are moderately worded use many, often, sometimes, generally, frequently, or some usually should be avoided. For example, executives usually suffer from hyperacidity. So in this statement tends to be correct. The word usually leads to the answer. Rule number 7. With true or false questions, avoid a grossly disproportionate number of either true or false statements or even patterns in the occurrence of true and false statements. For ease of correction, teachers sometimes create a pattern of true or false answers. Students will sense it and may arrive at a correct answer, not because he or she really knows the answer, but because he or she senses the pattern. Rule number 8. Avoid double negatives. This makes test item unclear and definitely will confuse the student. For example, the changes that take place in early childhood are not unchangeable. The test item simply means the changes in early childhood are changeable.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, my report is about multiple choice test. So, what is a multiple choice test? A multiple choice test offers the students with more than two options per item to choose from. It is usually consists of two parts, the stem, which is the question, and the options, which are the item. In a multiple choice test, there is a correct or best option while all the others are distractors. Distractors are chosen in a way that they are attractive to those who do not know the answer or who are guessing but have no appeal to those who actually know the answer. Multiple choice test allows the teachers to test higher order thinking skills even if the options are clearly stated. There are certain rules of thumb to be followed in constructing multiple choice tests. So here are the guidelines for constructing multiple choice items. Number 1. Do not use unfamiliar words, terms, and phrases. The ability of the item to discriminate or its level of difficulty should stem from the subject matter rather than from the wording of the question. For example, what would be the system reliability of a computer system whose slave and peripherals are connected in parallel circuits and each one has a known time to failure probability of 0.05? In this type of question or STEM, a student completely unfamiliar with the terms slave and peripherals may not be able to answer correctly even if he knew the subject matter of reliability. Number 2. Do not use modifiers that are vague and whose meanings can differ from one person to the next, such as much, often, usually, and etc. For example, much of the process of the photosynthesis takes place in the A. Bark, B. Leaf, C. Stem. In this example, the qualifier much is vague and could have been replaced by more specific qualifiers like 90% of the photosynthesis process or some similar phrase that would be more precise. Be quantitative. Number 3. Avoid complex or awkward word arrangements. Avoid use of negatives in the stem as this may add unnecessary comprehension difficulties. For example, as President of the Republic of the Philippines, Corazon Cojuangco Aquino would stand next to which President of the Philippine Republic subsequent to the 1986 EDSA Revolution. In this example, the word arrangements are done very complex or complicated and it became difficult to comprehend or to understand. It is much better to rewrite the question like this. Who was the President of the Philippines after Corazon C. Aquino? See, the question is now easier to understand because it is written in simple way. Number 4. Do not use negatives or double negatives, as such statements tend to be confusing. It is best to simpler sentences rather than sentences that would require expertise in grammatical construction. For example, which of the following will not cause inflation in the Philippine economy? In this question, there are two negatives in the statement, which is not and inflation. So it tends to be confusing. So it is better to rewrite the question into which of the following will cause inflation in the Philippine economy. So just like on number 3 example, it is best to simpler sentences rather than sentences that would require expertise in grammatical construction. So wag masyado nating pahirapan. Doon tayo sa madali, maintindihan and maayos. Number 5. Each item's stem should be as short as possible. Otherwise, you are risking testing more of reading and comprehension skills. So that is self-explanatory. Katulad lang nung mga kanina, huwag natin masyadong papahirapan yung pag-construct ng question. Doon lang tayo sa madaling intindihin. Number 6. Distractors should be equally plausible and attractive. For example, the short story May Day's Eve was written by which Filipino author? A. Jose Garcia Villa, B. Nick Joaquin, C. Genoveva Edrosa Matute, D. Robert Frost, E. Edgar Allan Poe. So in this example, only the first 3 in the options carry the burden of the entire item, since the last 2 can be essentially disregarded by the students because they are foreigners. So if the distractors had all been Filipino authors, the value of the item would be greatly increased. Number 7. All multiple choice options should be grammatically consistent with the stem. For example, as compared to the authors of the 1960s, authors in the 1980s blank. A. Traveling slower. B. Bigger interiors. C. To use less fuel. D. Contain more safety measures. In this example, it is very obvious that option A, B, and C are wrong for the language smart because when added to the stem, the sentence is grammatically wrong. Letter D is the only option which, when connected to the stem, remains the grammatical accuracy of the sentence, thus, obviously is the correct answer. Number 8. The length, explicitness, or degree of technicality of alternatives should not be the determinants of the correctness of the answer. For example, if the 3 angles of 2 triangles are congruent, then the triangles are A. Congruent whenever one of the sides of the triangles are congruent. B. Similar. C. Equiangular and therefore must also be congruent. D. Equilateral if they are equiangular. In this example, the correct choice B may be obvious from its length and explicitness alone. The other choices are long and attempt to explain why they must be the correct choices, forcing the students to think that they are, in fact, not the correct answers. Number 9. Avoid stems that reveal the answer to another item. For example, who will mostly disagree with the progressivist who claims that the child should be taught only that which interests him, and if he is not interested, wait till the child gets interested? A. Essentialist. B. Empiricist. C. Progressivist. D. Rationalist. Then in example number 2, which group will most strongly focus its teaching in the interest of the child? A. Progressivist. B. Essentialist. C. Parentialist. D. Reconstructionalist. In this example, one may arrive at a correct answer, which is letter B, essentialist, by looking at question number 1 that gives the answer to question number 2. Number 10. Avoid alternatives that are synonymous or with the same meaning with others, or those that include or overlap others. For example, what causes ice to transform from solid state to liquid state? A. Change in temperature. B. Change in pressure. C. Change in chemical composition. D. Change in heat levels. In this example, the options A and D are essentially the same. Thus, a student who spots these identical choices would right away narrow down the field of choices to A, B, and C, and the last destructor would play no significant role in increasing the value of the items. And if this happens, then the items has two answers, which is not acceptable. The next guidelines will be discussed by Sir Earl Kim Malyapre. Thank you.
Rule number 11. Avoid presenting sequence items in the same order as in the text. Rule number 12. Avoid use of assumed qualifiers that many examinees may not be aware of. Rule number 13. Avoid use of unnecessary words or phrases which are not relevant to the problem at hand, unless such discriminating ability is the primary intent of the evaluation. The item's value is particularly damaged if the unnecessary material is designed to distract or mislead. Such items test the student's reading comprehension rather than knowledge of the subject matter. For example, the side opposite the 30-degree angle in a right triangle is equal to half the length of the hypotenuse. If the sine of a 30 degree is 0.5 and its hypotenuse is 5, what is the length of the side opposite the 30-degree angle? Letter A 2.5, letter B 3.5, letter C 5.5, letter D 1.5. So in this example, the sine of a 30-degree angle is really quite unnecessary since the first sentence already gives the method for finding the length of the side opposite the 30-degree angle. This is a case of a teacher who wants to make sure that no students in his class gets the wrong answer. Rule number 14. Avoid use of non-relevant sources of difficulty such as requiring a complex calculation when only knowledge of a principle is being tested. Note in the previous example, knowledge of the sine of the 30-degree angle would have led some students to use the sine formula for calculation even if a simpler approach would have sufficed. Rule number 15. Pack the question in the stem. Here is an example of a question which has no question. Avoid it by all means. For example, the Roman Empire blank. A had no central government, B had no definite territory, C had no heroes, D had no common religion. Rule number 16. Use the none of the above option only when the kid answer is totally correct. When choice of the best response is intended, none of the above is not appropriate, since the implication has already been made that the correct response may be partially inaccurate. Rule number 17. Note that use of all of the above may allow credit for partial knowledge. In a multiple option item, allowing only one option choice, if a student only knew that two options were correct, he could then deduce the correctness of all of the above. This assumes you are allowed only one correct choice. Rule number 18. Better still use none of the above and all of the above sparingly, but best not to use them at all. Rule number 19. Having compound response choices may purposefully increase difficulty of an item. The difficulty in a multiple choice item may be controlled by varying the homogeneity or degree of similarity of responses. The more homogeneous, the more difficult the item because they all look like the correct answer. Example, less homogeneous. Thailand is located in letter A, Southeast Asia, B, Eastern Europe, C, South America, D, East Africa, E, Central America. So another example for more homogeneous. Thailand is located next to Laos and Cambodia. Letter B, India and China. C, China and Malaya. D, Laos and China. And letter E, India and Malaya.
Matching type of test. Matching type of test can be considered a multiple choice type of test where the choices progressively reduce as one successfully matches the items on the left and with the items on the right. So in this kind of test, the choices are reduced when one item is successfully matches on the items on the next side. So this is an example of matching type of test. In the first column, the items are called premises, while in the other side, it is called the responses. In the first column, the items are numbered while the next side are labeled by letters. So here are some guidelines in constructing matching type of test. First, match homogeneous and not heterogeneous items. The items to match must be homogeneous. If you want your students to match authors with their literary works, in one column will be authors, and the second column must be literary works. Don't insert nationality, for instance, with name of authors. That will not be a good item since it's obviously wrong. So this is an example of homogeneous. In the first column, these are the literary works or the premises, and the responses are the authors. Number 2, the stem. Longer in construction than the options. This must be put in the first column, while the options, that is usually shorter, must be put in the second column. So this means that the longer items or longer contents must be in the first column, while the shorter items must be put on the second column or the responses. Number 3, the options must be more in number than the stems to prevent the students from arriving at the answer by mere processes of elimination. Number 4, to help the examinee find the answer easier, arrange the options alphabetically or chronologically, whichever is applicable. So this means that the arrangements of the option must be alphabetically or arranged through time so that it will be easier for students to find the answer. Number 5. Like any other test, the direction of the test must be given. The examinees must know exactly what to do. So the instructions on conducting this kind of test must be clear so that the students will exactly know what to do when doing this kind of test. Matching type items unfortunately often test lower order thinking skills or knowledge level and are unable to test higher order thinking skills such as application and judgment skills. So another type of matching type of test is the imperfect type. Imperfect because an answer may be repeated, and so like an unfaithful husband or wife can be fair one another than his/her lawful wife or husband. The difference of this in the perfect type of test is that the answer is can be repeated. So, like for example, the items on the first column can be repeatedly matched on the left side. So, it is called an imperfect type of test. So, this is an example of imperfect matching type of test. So, in the first column, the items can be repeatedly matched on the items on the left side. If you intend to make use of this imperfect type of matching test, make sure you indicate so in the direction to caution the student who usually think that the answer may not be repeated. So when you construct this type of test, you must indicate first in the direction that the answer may be repeated so that the students will know what to do and how will they answer the test.
Completion type of test. So what is completion type of test? Completion type of test is classified as one of the supply types or constructed response types of test. This test consists a series of items which is the testee will fill a word or replace on the blanks. This is called fill the blank type test, usually referred to as multiple blanks to be answered per items, compared to identification type, which have only one blank per item. So, completion type of test is a letter completion type or fill in the blank type. So, here is the example. Write an appropriate synonym for each following. Each blank corresponds to a letter. Metamorphose, number 1. And number 2 is flourish, which is number 1 is change and number 2 is grow. So here are the guidelines for the formulation of a completion type of test. Number 1. Avoid over mutilated sentence like this sentence. Give enough clue to the students. So the example is the blank produced by the blank is used by the green blank to change the blank and the blank into blank. This process is called the blank. So in here number 1, in meaning to say that we have to give enough clues to answer the item to make it easier for them to answer. So number 2, avoid open-minded item. There should be one acceptable answer. This item is open-minded, hence no good test item. So example, Ernest Hemingway wrote. So meaning to say in this number 2, we should avoid open-minded. There's only one that answer that acceptable in sentence and not some words that are not connected or related to that. Number 3. Blank should be at the end or near of the sentence. The question must be asked before answer expected. Like matching type test, the stem must be in the first column. So, number 3 means that all blank should be end or near in the end. It is just like the matching type. Just like say in the number 1, we should give enough clues to answer them. 4. Ask question on more significant items, not trivial matter. Example, Jose Rizal was born on June blank 1961. So it means in this number 4, we should ask more significant items, but not on trivial matter because it might be hard to define. The length of the blank must not suggest the answer, so better make blank size uniforms. So, in number 5 means that blank should be not long or short because it's easy for them to identify the answer of the items. So, it must be uniform, or it means to say is same length in the other items. Example, a part of the speech name is persons, places, or things is so blank. A word used to connect clauses or sentence or to coordinate words in the same clause is called.
Essays. Assessment has the express objective of determining whether or not learners have learned what they are supposed to learn. Another way of assessment is writing an essay. Essays are classified as non-objective tests allows the assessment of higher order thinking skills. Such tests require students to organize their thoughts on a subject in matter and coherent sentence in order to inform an audience. In essays tests, students are required to write one more paragraphs on a specific topic. So essay is an assessment question that requires an answer in a sentence, paragraph, or short composition. Essay assessments are usually classified as subjective assessments as there are normally a variety of responses. Students respond to the essay as if he she performing a specific role in the essay. Essay question can be used to measure attainment of variety objectives. Number one is comparing. Comparing it is in a form of comparative essay. It is describe the similarities and difference between subjects. It is an essay in which two things are compared and contrast. So sample question is describe the similarities and differences between blank. So compare the following methods for blank. Number two is relating cause and effect. So it is a form of argumentative essay. It is details the effect relationship between two subjects. It shows how one person thinks idea or even directly influences another person think idea or event. So this is kind of essay instructed around the goal of discovering and discussing events that lead to certain results. So sample question is what are the major causes of and what would be the most likely effects of. So number three is justifying. So justifying it is a form of justification essay. It is an essay that states claim and supports it with logical reasons and relevant evidence. Evidence can include information from a text and example from personal experience. Sample question is, which of the following alternative would you favor and why? Explain why you disagree with the following statement. So number four is summarizing. So summarizing, give a clear objective picture of the original text. Most most importantly, summarize states only the main points of a text of a lecture without giving example or details. Taking a lot of information and creating a condensed version that covers the main points. Sample question is state the points included in blank and briefly summarize the contents of blank. So number five is generalizing. States a specific kind of conclusion. So it is a form from several examples or facts and what they have in common. Sample generalization is all birds have wings. There are 12 months within a year. Sample question is formulate several valid generalization from the following data. State a set of principles that can explain the following events. Number 6 is inferring. It is in a form of inference essay. It is a way of coming up with a good and understandable conclusion either by using observed or background knowledge. Sample question is, in the light of facts presented, what is the most likely to happen when? How would Senator X be most likely to react to bomb explosion after the bar examination last September? So number 7 is classifying. So what is classifying? It is a form of classification essay. So classifies ideas, characters, or objectives with shared characteristics into specific groups of categories. It is a formal piece of writing designed to showcase your skill and categorize in generalization. A sample question is, group, group the following items according to blank. What do following items have in common? So number 8 is applying. So applying it is a form of application essay. It allows teacher to assess each student's level of critical thinking by judging the description of the application essay, the link to the specific concept in the analysis of each communication concept. Some promotes students' classroom participation by helping them apply concept learned in the classroom to their own personal experience. Sample question is, using the principle of blank as a guide, describe how you would solve the following problem situation and describe a situation that illustrates the principle of blank. One is analyzing. So it is a form of analysis or analytical essay. A person making an analytical essay need to present some type of argument or claim about what they are analyzing. It is a piece of writing that provides substantive analysis of a topic. Sample question. Describe the following error in the paragraphs. List and describe the main characteristics of blank. Number 10 is evaluating. It is a form of evaluation essay. It is a composition that offers value judgment about a particular subject according to a set of criteria. It is a type of argument that provides evidence to justify a writer's opinions about a subject. Sample question. Describe the strength and weakness of the following. Using the criteria we developed in class, write the evaluation of blank. So the last is creating. It's the art of making things up or putting a creative splash on a history as in creative nonfiction. In any instant, creative writing makes one step out of reality and into a new realm inspired by their own imagination. With creative writing, one can be able to express feeling and emotion instead of cold, hard facts, as they would in academic writing. It is a form of creative essay. So sample question. Make up a story describing what would happen if blank design a plan to prove that blank. Write a well-organized report that shows blank.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Gerald Legisana and this is my report for type of essays. So number 1, restricted essays. It's also referred to a short focus response. Examples are asking students to write an example, like list 3 reasons or compare and contrast 2 techniques. So in restricted essay, it means that all their answers are correct as long they express their answer in their own words, and it must be related to the topics. So here is the short response question of 10th grade reading. How are Scrub J and the Mockingbirds different? So here the short response questions of 10th grade reading. How are the scrub jay and the mockingbirds different? Support your answer with the details and information from the article. So, non-restricted or extended essay. Extended response can be much longer and complex than shorter response, but students are encouraged to remain focused and organized. So in here in extended essay, students is allowed to express their own ideas and interrelations among the ideas, use their strategy from the organizations, but reasonable, verbal or unlogical logic. Because of this focus on logical argument, reason answer, teachers must be open and accepting the uncomfortable responses from their creative process of student, often including reasons and factual presentations. So here is the sample extended response questions from 5th grade science. Robert is designed a demonstration to display at this school science fair. He will show how changing the position of the fulcrum on lever changes the amount of force needed to lift an object. To do this, Robert will use a piece of wood from lever and block of woods to act a fulcrum. He plans to move the fulcrum to the different places on the lever to see how its placement affects the force needed to lift an object. So part A is identified at least 2 actions would make Robert's demonstration better. So part B is explain why each action would be improved in the demonstrations. So guidelines for formulating and scoring essay tests. Number 1. Praise the direction in such way that students are guided on included specific how they respond specific how the students responds. So example, using the details and information from the article, 100 islands are summarized. The point of article for complete response. So it's history 10 points, its interest features 10 points, why it's a landmark 5 points. Non-example of this, number 1 is using the details in information from the article. 100 islands summarize the main points of the articles. So in this number 1, we can see that the first example that it very clear that how you will answer the essay, and for number 2 example or the non-example are must be long or hard for the students to answer this. Number 2, inform the students on these criteria to be used for grading their essay. This rule allows the student focus on relevant substance materials rather than on peripheral and necessary facts based on informations. So, example, write an essay on the topic plant photosynthesis using indicate you will grade it according to criteria: coherence, accuracy of statement, use of keywords, clarity, and extra points for innovation presentation of ideas. So number 2 is So in number 2, we usually use the Rubik's Cube for essay grading. So sometimes these students are hard to formulate essay because lack of vocabulary, or sometimes they can focus in the topics. So number 3, put time limit on the essay test. So decide on your essay grading system prior to getting the essay of your students. So just like in number 2, we usually use the Rubik's Cube for grading system in essay tests. Number 5, evaluate all students' answers to the one question before proceeding to the next. Scoring and grading essay test question by rather than student by students makes it possible to maintain a more uniform standard for judging the answers to the questions. These procedures have offset of the halo effect in grading when all the answers on the paper are read together. The greatest impress of the paper as a whole is up to influence the gradients he assigned to individual answer. So, so in the number 5, usually in grading questions is usually checked by students or teachers to students. And you also have you see this it also you see this the halo effect. The halo effect on the students' grades is caused by biased perceptions of the teacher towards who students may be conscious or unconscious. This is means that the positive or negative perception to the students. Number 6, evaluate answers to essays questions without knowing identifier of the writer. This is another attempt to control personal bias during scoring. Answer to essay questions should be evaluated in terms of what is written, not in terms what is known about the writers from the other contacts with them. The best way to prevent prior knowledge from influencing our judgment answer without knowing the identifier of the writer. This can be done by having students write their own names on the back of the paper by using code numbers in the place of names. So in number 6, usually the teacher is the one checking the test paper to avoid the bias in grading the essay test. So the purpose is of writing the names in the back or using the codes is to avoid bias in grading, but usually the teacher is the one that make that grade in the essays. Whenever possible, have two or more person grade each other. The way the best way to check on the essay reliability to scoring of essay answer is to obtain two or more independent judgment. This may not be feasible to routine class testing, but it might done periodically with fellow teachers. It becomes essentially vital where results are used important and irreservable decisions, such as selection of students for further training and special awards. Some teachers use cumulative criteria and eyeing, adding the weights given to each citation or basis for grading, while others use the reverse. In the latter method, each student begins scoring 100 and points are deducted every time they counters make mistake in criteria is missed in his essay. So in number 7, once the decision is made, the score of the essay cannot be reversible. So some teachers usually add some weight on in citation. So adding 100 points, and once they see a mistakes, they deduction the grades. 8. Provide optional questions. It is difficult to construct questions of equal difficulty, so teacher cannot have valid comparisons of students' achievements. So, in number 8, it means that sometimes in answering the constructed questions, it is difficult to check if they have not a valid and the comparison of the student. So number 8 means that it's difficult to construct questions that may not. So, so 8. So number 8 means that it is difficult to valid the answer of the student achievement because it might be hard. It might be hard to the teacher checking the essay test papers. Number 9. Provide information about the value or weight of the questions and how it will be scored. Number 10. Emphasize higher level thinking skills. So it means that we have to critically thinking in the answer of the students or the question of the essay test. Example, scientists have found the ocean can influence the temperature of nearby land masses. Coastal land masses tends to have more moderate temperatures in summer and winter than inland land masses of the same latitude. Example, consider the influence of ocean temperatures. Explain why inland temperatures vary in summer and winter to greater degree than coastal temperatures. List 3 coastal land masses. So you can see that in the first examples was very detailed, in the non-example was not very detailed. Thank you.